last week, the main point of what we were dealing with as we talked about worship for the first time was the fact that there is a stunning silence in the outward place and the forms of worship that we find in the Bible. In other words, when you look for it, it's not found there so much, at least in the frame of reference that we think about it. We also understood that there is a radical intensification in understanding worship as a personal, inward, Godward experience of the heart. That typically, if in fact it is real, it will happen every day. And so what we discovered at the end of our time last week was that the silence about the outward forms of worship in the fact that the gathered life of the church in the New Testament is never formally called worship. And the word that is mainly used in the Old Testament, we used that word, we looked at it really closely, is almost completely absent from the letters of Paul. But we did find that Jesus focused and centered on that word. He used it with the woman at the well. And what he said was that it does not matter where you worship, whether in Samaria or Jerusalem, as long as you do it in spirit and in truth. So if that's correct, and I think it is, the inner spiritual reality of worship, of encounter, of pursuit with God replaces any geographical locality. And it may well mean that it would replace our personal preferences of time and style. God help us. So we concluded that the wonder of worship is not external, localized acts, but inner Godward experience. Not primarily in a church service, although that is certainly important, but primarily in the daily exchange and expression of our allegiance to God. Now, how does this play out? Well, it plays out in how we handle our money. It plays out in how we treat those that are less fortunate. It plays out in how we express our sexuality and how we keep our marriage vows and how we speak up when given the opportunity to speak up for Christ. If you've never read the book or even seen the movie, you probably need to. It is a heavy duty one. It is not light and fluffy. It's the color purple. And in there is the story of Shug. Shug is the lady you see there. She's having a moment with God, but she is spoken of, really, if you know the book or the movie, you know that Celie is the main character, and she writes letters to God. And in her writing letters to God, she says quite a bit. Celie, you'll remember, was played by Oprah Winfrey in the movie, and she has lived an incredibly difficult life. But in one part of the book, it talks about it this way. She's talking, Celie, tell the truth. Have you ever found God in church? I never did. I just found a bunch of folks hoping for him to show. Any God I ever felt in church, I brought in with me. I think all the other folks did too. They come to church to share God, not find God. I think she's right, and I would say even stronger than that. When you compare personal and corporate worship, and we're going to be kind of juxtaposing them throughout this whole experience when we talk about it from the one hand to the other, could it be that the quality of our personal worship leads us to have the quality of our corporate worship? I would say to you that it is in what you have done throughout the week that prepares you for what you will do here. Now, do I hope and pray that what happens here will in fact be a springboard for you to have yet again more personal worship? Yes, I certainly would want that. So today, you and I, if we look and think about what it is that is the essence, the very core of worship, it is not essentially an outward act, but rather it is the experience of a heart. So if in fact what I'm saying is true, whether it is an inner act or an outward part of your body, the focus needs to be one thing, and that is the magnifying, the lifting, the pursuing of God. Now think about that. No matter what it is that we do in this building for this hour that we call worship, it is about that thing. Worship is about reflecting what we believe concerning the worth and the value of God. What inner experience of your heart reflects the value and the worth of God? We're going to look at Philippians 1 here in just a moment. It is in your worship folder. But a verse that I want to pull out, matter of fact, I've already pulled it out in context there. I've got it italicized and in bold. It says, "It is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be put to shame in any way, but that by my speaking with all boldness, Christ will be exalted, now as always in my body, whether by life or by death." Now, I'll tell you, 30 years ago, I read that verse, and I had the seminary interpretation of that. But as I've watched people live and die, as I've watched people reach a point in their life where it literally was easier and better and appropriate that in their dying they gave obedience and revelation and celebration of God. Now, I didn't understand all that from seminary, but I've understood it as I've watched people's lives. Paul says, "I am hard-pressed to choose between the two." He says, "My desire is to depart and to be with Christ, for that is far better." But he goes on. And ultimately what he's saying is that at the end of the day, if you and I want to be ultimately satisfied with life, it will only be found in our satisfaction that we, in fact, find in God. I love how John Piper says it, and I gave it to you as a quote in your folder. John Piper says, "God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in Him." Now think about that. How satisfied have you been lately? And is that satisfaction based upon a set of circumstances that have to do with your physical well-being or with your emotional well-being? And how do those dots connect in terms of really being deeply satisfied with God? Let's read Philippians 1. It's in your folder. What does it matter? Just this: that Christ is proclaimed in every way, whether out of false motives or true, and in that I rejoice. Yes, and I will continue to rejoice. For I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance. It is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be put to shame in any way, but that by my speaking with all boldness, Christ will what? Be exalted now, as always in my body, whether by life or by death. That's the one we talked about just a moment ago. For me, living is Christ and dying is gain. And if I am to live in the flesh, which means fruitful labor, for me, I do not know which I prefer. I am hard-pressed between the two. My desire to depart and to be with Christ, where that is far better, but to remain in the flesh is more necessary for you. The essence of praising Christ is prizing Christ. In other words, making Him your prize, making Him your focus. What does it mean later in Paul's letter when he says in Philippians 3:8, "I count all things to be lost in view of the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them but rubbish in order to know that I gain Christ." So we've walked around the kind of theological edges of what Philippians mean. Now let's take it apart, put it in a pie, and divide it into three pieces. We experience the essence of worship when the pursuit of God is our sole priority. People who experience the essence of worship are never confused about why they come to worship. They're never confused because they understand that it is not simply about songs and prayers and sermons, as wonderful as sermons are, but rather it is in fact about finding and making sure that God, through Christ, is my sole priority. And the subtle difference I would want to make is worship generally, in other words, one among many, or is it solely about your relationship with God? Now, what does this mean? And I'm going to get very personal because I think it even kind of can get on we preachers a little bit. if we're not careful, we will think about the act, the stage, the opportunity, the planning, and the process of worship so much that we, in fact, can say all that we do is a means to honor God, when in fact, everything we do is given to that. There's a Doonesbury cartoon. I'm not much of a cartoon guy, but several pastors have pointed me in the direction of him on occasion, and one of those is very incredibly timely. Doonesbury Comic Strip has a recurring bit of a theme, if you've watched it much through the years, about the church, little church of Walden. That little church is decidedly non-denominational congregation, and it's presided over by Reverend Scott Sloan, and Reverend Sloan is trying to keep up with the changing times. And in one particular strip, Michael Doonesbury is back for a visit, and he is asking Scott to tell him how his church got started. And he says, aerobics. He says, aerobics? He said, yes, I needed something to attract folks from the community. The focus group suggested aerobics class. It worked, so I added yoga and bingo, and then a few 12-step programs. Then I opened a soup kitchen, which led to cooking lessons. Before I knew it, I had my own denomination. Doonesbury muses and responds, well, that's how religion spreads. In the next strip in the series, Sloan is giving Joni Caucus, I think there's some significance to her name, Joni Caucus, a tour of his church. She hasn't been there for a while, and so he's bringing her up to speed about the changes. He said that old house is used for our spiritual wellness seminars and the various 12-step recovery programs. But in this new wing we have a food court and a fitness center and an interpretive dance class. Caucus wonders where in this vast complex the people worship. He said, oh, we save energy every week on heating bills. We worship on our website, and it really works well. The final installment is a longer one. And so from Sunday Comics, in it, Sloan is talking to a couple of first-time visitors, and he asks them what they're looking for in a church, and the conversation goes something like this. The husband replies with a question of his own. Well, what's your basic approach here, Reverend? Is it traditional gospel? He thinks for a moment. He says, in a way, I like to describe it as a 12-step Christianity. Basically, it is, I believe, we are all recovering sinners. And my ministry is about overcoming denial. It's about recommitment and about redemption. It's all that I say here. It's all in the brochure. Well, the husband says, wait a minute. Sinners, redemption, doesn't that imply guilt? He says, well, yes. He says, I do rely on an occasional disincentive to keep the flock from going astray, and guilt is a part of that. And the husband says, turning to his wife, I don't know. There's too much negativity in this world as it is. She says, that's right. We're looking for a church that will be supportive, a place where we can feel good about ourselves. I'm not sure that guilt thing works for us. On the other hand, the husband thinks, paging through that glossy brochure, do you offer racquetball? And suddenly, his wife reminds him, oh, but the Unitarians offer that too, honey. Let's shop around some more. Well, it's a tongue-in-cheek view at all that we're trying to do sometimes by attracting people. Never in my lifetime is it been this difficult to help people understand that the local body of believers called the church is the handprint, the fingerprint, the heartbeat of God. And that when that local church works right, and it doesn't always. I was with a group of pastors this week, and I will tell you, there's lots of them not working as well as they need to. But when that local body works right, there is absolutely nothing like it on the face of the earth. And why and how do we make it work right? We do that when we understand that the essence of worship is about the pursuit of God as our sole priority. But secondly, when we experience the essence of worship, when we see it as the pursuit of God is our greatest joy. Honestly, Many Christians believe it is morally defective to seek happiness. I would say peace. And to that degree that joy is not evident in your life, I would say you need to understand that joy is an absolute requirement of walking with Christ. I would ask you, is it possible for you to understand that your sins have been forgiven and that you walk with the fullness and the abundance of joy in your life and not, in fact, allow that joy to be experienced in your life, in your experience with fellow believers? You see, the basic attitude of worship on Sunday is not to come with our hands full to give to God, to do Him a favor, but rather that we come here with our hands empty, ready to receive God, and in fact, God acts as our purifier. What we receive in worship is God. It is, in fact, not entertainment. Now, let me define the difference for you. Entertainment is the action, according to the dictionary, of providing or being provided with amusement or enjoyment. Worship is reverent honor and homage paid to God. Now, that does not mean that we cannot laugh, and it does not mean that when I am incredibly funny, you should not roll in the aisles with humor when I tell you something funny. Ha ha. But believe it or not, there is in fact a place in Nicholas County, West Virginia, where it had at one point an ordinance that said no clergy is allowed to tell jokes or humorous stories from the pulpit during a church service. They got rid of it, I believe. But it's from the book, and you'll see the front of the book here in just a moment, John Amos and Michael Rose's book on the words about music. And like most of us, it has this reminder. Remember that great piece of music called The Messiah? Well, after it was given the first time, it had its London debut. There is a conversation, and it's in this book as well. Make the point that we're attempting to make really this morning. Perhaps something similar, what Handel remarks to Lord Canute after that first London performance. He says, "I should be sorry, my lord, if I have only succeeded in entertaining them. I wished to make them better." And I will tell you that at the core of my being, at the core of what Cassandra does every week, at the core of everything that we do in this place, it is not to entertain. Does it mean that we will hopefully engage you, that we will move you with humor, that we will in fact attract you with the obvious seriousness with which we approach this task? Yes, all of the things above. But if in fact you leave here and you do not understand that that joy of God that has in fact saved you and keeps you has not spread to a reality that shows itself on your face and in your lifestyle, then we have in fact failed. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for what? They shall be satisfied." To be satisfied is to know what Ezra and Nehemiah knew. The joy is the most infallible sign of the presence of God. Why did they believe that? Because they said, "The joy of the Lord is your strength." Jesus knew that. He says, "If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, and just as I have kept the Father's commandments and abide in his love, I have said these things to you." That my joy, what? My joy may be in you. But that's even not enough. That my joy will be in you, and that my joy may be complete. And the psalmist says, "As a deer pants after the flowing springs, so my soul pants for thee." Now, what does it mean when it pants? I've learned a new way of understanding that. Holden, our 2-year-old, celebrated his birthday yesterday. He loves dogs. I don't know where he got that. I mean, nobody in our family likes animals. We've kept them far away from animals. I know all you animal lovers are looking at me with a mean eye. I know what you're doing. But he loves dogs. I mean, he sees a dog and he will run toward it. Jensen is 7. She runs away from all dogs. He runs toward it. Well, the dog will knock him down, lick on him. He's just laughing the whole time. Well, one of the things he has learned is that they make a noise, and that noise is so he, at any sign of a dog or anything else, that's the sound that comes out of him. Well, I'll be honest with you, it scared me the first time I heard him do this. I thought we need to take this boy to the hospital. But he does it over. Why? Because he wants to be a part of sounding and feeling that moment. I think the psalmist is saying, I want to be hungry and thirsty and loving it. I want to seek after. My soul pants for thee. We experience the essence of worship when we, thirdly, the pursuit of God is our ultimate destination. What do I mean by that? I almost put another word, and I put the word end game. It's our end game. What does end game mean? Well, if you've played games lately, and if any of you who know me personally know I don't play a lot of games. I just find them boring. But the other day I was playing games with my little mentor fellow that I have, the middle school guy that I meet with weekly. And we were playing a game called Connect or something. And I learned what end game means, because it's when you're getting close to the end of the game and there's just a few more moves to be made, whether it be checkers or whatever it is that you're playing, sorry, and all those games. And there's just a few more moves to be made. It's called the end game. When the pursuit of God is ultimately your end game, there is nothing else on the board of life that matters but that final step of making sure that God is in fact the center and the end game of your life. So what does this mean for those of us who attend church and those of us who are even pastors? What does this mean? Well, it means this. Worship on Sunday morning is conceived sometimes as a means to something else. We worship together to raise money or to attract crowds. We worship together to heal hurts and to recruit workers. We worship together to improve the morale of our congregations and to give talented musicians the opportunity to use their incredible gifts. We worship together to teach children the way of righteousness, to help marriages hang together, to evangelize those who are not yet know Christ, and to use this as an opportunity to motivate people to serve outwardly in service projects and to give churches a close family feeling. Yes, all of those things are peripheral things, but in fact, true worship is because of the genuine affection for God is the only ultimate end of worship. In other words, when I come in here, it may be any of those things that might be one of the side things, but the means with which the end game with which I want to serve and to speak to is this, that it is my end game to give to Christ my very best. I never understand bees. We met a beekeeper the other day. She actually gave us some of her honey, and you'll see a picture of one there. I've never stood how anybody would really want to do that. But she told me that she had never been stung by a bee. She'd been a beekeeper, 20, 30 years. I bet you if I went there, I'd be stung multiple times. But she said no, not necessarily at all. But the thing that I'm always amazed when I look at bees and all that is the bee is a small and subtle, almost incredibly essential part of the world of our that we live in. And it is that fact that 1/3 of our food is some way impacted by the pollination that the bee involves itself in. But this week I kept thinking about what worship, if it is the sole priority, if it is in fact the end game, if worship is to be that moment. And I remembered thinking of the novel and the movie, Cider House Rules. Michael Caine in there plays Dr. Wilbur Larch. If you've not seen the movie, that's him doing what he did every night with the kids. Every night he would go to the orphans. He oversaw an orphanage, and he would go in there and he would read from Charles Dickens, and he would, at the end of that, every night, gathered in that dormitory of beds around there, he would gather every night and he would say to them, "Good night, you princes of Maine, you kings of New England." Now, obviously, none of them were princes of Maine or kings of New England. But there it was that he would encourage and rejoice over them. Worship at its best is when we recognize that in giving our sole priority to one who loves us is that he rejoices over us. We're going to sing a song in a moment, and I want you to imagine God rejoicing over us. Once in a while at that little orphanage, one of the boys would get adopted and he would leave, and Dr. Larch, during that bedtime thing, would say, let's be happy. Let's be happy for Homer Wells. Homer has found a good home. Good night, Homer. It was another way of reminding him that God has provided yet another step in the journey of life. I don't know where your journey has led you today, but I would want you to know, as Zephaniah would say, the Lord your God is in your midst and will rejoice over you in gladness. Imagine him smiling and laying his hand on us and saying, I rejoice over you in gladness. Let's pray together. Father, it's our hope that during these moments we would simply find our home. We would make our way home. We would make our way to a place of understanding that to be loved by you gives us value and worth. And all the things the world does around us, we look and seek and search for value. And we do not find value in what the world shows in us. And yet, we have to understand that ultimately we are valuable because you, in fact, love us. And you rejoice over us. And that is the best news we will ever hear. May we sing with the full knowledge of that. Hear our prayer, Father. We pray this in the name of Christ. Amen. If you're here and you need to accept Christ or to renew your faith or to say, I want to be a part of a fellowship of believers like this, we would invite you to come. I'm down here, you come. Let's stand together and sing.
Come to the water, all who are thirsty. Come and drink. Come to the table.